welcome to CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell podcast. This is ET1 Anderson. Today, I talked to a good friend of mine from Spaywar Pacific, Dr. Josh Kvavle. We're going to talk about different ways that sailors on the waterfront can interact with scientists and try to get past some of the silos that exist between us. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the CNO Rapid Innovation Cell podcast. This is ET1 Anderson. Today I have with me Dr. Josh Kvavle from Spaywar. Welcome, Dr. Kvavle.
Thanks.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Good. All right. Well, let's talk about what you do over at Spaywar and your grassroots group.
Well, I'm an electrical engineer, and when I first came to Spaywar, I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know what I had gotten myself into, I guess you could say. When you first arrive with a PhD at a Navy research lab like Spaywar, you're expected to come up with proposals and learn what sorts of needs the warfighter might have, but there's really not a good infrastructure to train you how to do that. So I was pretty nervous about doing that. And then I found that a lot of other people that came in had the same concern. So we kind of started meeting periodically and then turned it into a formal workshop that we put together, and we were funded to do that. And that kind of spawned this grassroots S&T community of practice. S&T means science and technology. It's like the Navy's word for research and development.
Sure.
So grassroots S&T is the follow-on to that whole feeling like I didn't know what I was doing, getting a bunch of other people together, and I think we're making a difference. So it's exciting.
Outstanding. Yeah. In fact, I know you've had some people over there to talk to them, and you even hosted the CRIC last year during the AFCEA conference.
Right.
So that's outstanding. Have you guys been affected by the furlough or anything?
We were furloughed. We had 6 furlough days, and working for a Navy Warfare Center or Navy lab this year has been the worst year in like the last probably 3 decades. Except there have been a few good things. One thing that is positive that's happened in the last 3 years is that we have something called Naval Innovative Science and Engineering funding. And so that took our science and technology budget down from a few million to more than 14 million. So we have a lot more money to invest in research and development and that sort of thing. So that's been really positive. If it hadn't been for that, all those other things probably would be really frustrating. The other thing too that I find is being able to interact with people like yourself motivates me and the other scientists and engineers because we see the sacrifices that you make. So being furloughed for a few days is like, if you think about what you guys go through, all that stuff, sure. It makes it worth it knowing that we're helping you to help protect the freedoms in our country. So, well,
it's always good, I think, to build empathy between the engineers and the warfighter because ultimately you're there to support us and to help us fight better. Yeah. But if there's no communication, then it's obviously it's very difficult. In fact, I think one of your engineers mentioned one time something called shelfware, where you'll design something that's awesome, and then we'll look at it and say, "Oh, it's cool, but it doesn't fit the need that we want." And so obviously we want to minimize that too.
Yeah, no one wants to work on shelfware. And one of the other things that we realized early on with Grassroots S&T is that we don't have a connection to the warfighter. When you come in, you basically can kind of hide away in your laboratory all the time. It's getting harder to do that now, especially since unless you have a good application for your technology, it's hard to find funding for it. So we're being kind of pushed out to try to find what really the warfighter needs. And that's one of the lessons we taught was learn warfighter needs. So you came and briefed us when we were trying to practice that, which everybody I think really enjoyed getting that connection with a warfighter, and we want to do more things like that.
Sure. And absolutely we look forward to that, and I hope to do more of that or get some more people on the waterfront excited about it too. And so for just with asking people that might be listening to this right now that are in the Navy, actively serving or whatever, what are some things that you would like to know? I mean, just if you could ask questions of sailors right now, what would you ask them? What are the things you?
What's your biggest? What do you do? I guess is and how do you do it,
Mm-hmm.
and what are the obstacles that you run into when you're doing that. At SPAWAR, we're mostly focused on command, control, communications, computers, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which I think is basically all the good stuff to focus on.
Sure.
So that covers quite a broad area, but in that realm, what information, what capabilities would a warfighter want to have if they could have it? And actually, I have a couple quotes that I really that I think kind of present the problem well, and one of them is from Winston Churchill, so this is like over 100 years old, but he said, or close to it, "A hiatus exists between the inventor who knows what they could invent if they only knew what was wanted, and the soldiers who know or ought to know what they want and would ask for if they only knew how much science could do for them. You've never really bridged that gap yet." Here's another one. This is from Vannevar Bush, director of the Office of Scientific Research and Development during World War II. He said, "No scientist could hope to grasp fully the military phases of the problem. This can be attained only as a result of a life spent in close association with the sea, with naval tradition, and with the responsibility of command. Yet it is equally true that no naval officer can be expected to grasp fully the implications and trends of modern science and its applications. This requires equally forcefully a lifetime spent in science and in the personal utilization of the scientific method." So it kind of shows those two worlds are on either side of what is referred to in our acquisition training as the valley of death. So we're, as scientists and engineers, we want to come across that to you as warfighters.
Sure.
And we would invite you to know we're over here.
Mm-hmm.
We know you have a lot of things you're worried about that are much more urgent. But if you're interested in helping us come up with the next technological innovations, I know that especially at SPAWAR, there's a lot of people who'd be very interested in talking with you about that. We feel like that's our role, to be the middle, the agents of transition between what's happening in industry and in academia, that's the really cool science, and then what the warfighter needs.
Right.
So that's kind of our value proposition as an organization, is we can be that kind of glue in between those two worlds.
Sure. Yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, those were written a long time ago, and technology changes so much more quickly today than it did even 70, 80 years ago. And so, if it was important then, it's even more so now as more battle spaces open up. There's the cyber realm. And I think actually one of the interesting things today with a lot of government websites being down is it feels like a simulated cyber attack. What would happen if we lost some of our government websites for the day? Well, a friend posted, one of our CRIC members, I think, posted on Facebook about TRICARE Online not being up. And that's a hassle. But in some ways, it's kind of like practicing for the unexplained. So anyway, I digress.
Yeah, but it's true. And when you think about all the new areas of warfighting, there's more pressure to come up with better technological solutions that actually meet the need. We don't have all sorts of money to be throwing at things that aren't problems. We have to do more with less.
Right.
And so one of the things that, like I said, we're kind of in the middle there. There was this man named Dr. James Colvard. He was a bureaucrat, which is a noble title when you give it to him. There's some bureaucrats where that would not be a noble title.
Sure.
There's an interesting book called Bureaucratic Nirvana, Life at the Center of the Box, where Hugh Montgomery, who's friends with Dr. Colvard, mentions that it's a noble title. But anyway, that's another point. But he said that laboratories must be the intellectual impedance match between the art and craft of war. So in electrical engineering, you're always trying to match coaxial cables and transmission lines and match the impedance. Right. So I like that because it's nerdy, but it's true. We need to be the impedance match between the art of war and the craft of war.
Right.
And I really like that. Another thing too, speaking of working between technologists and warfighters, is another quote that Dr. Colvard wrote in an article about kind of this idea. He said, with the Manhattan Project as a model, which had General Groves in charge, but working in a complementary relationship with Dr. Oppenheimer, they saw the need for a technical institution that would bring together both naval officers and scientists. Such an institution would combine, in a daily working relationship, the knowledge of the weapons needs of the Navy and the potential of science and technology to meet those needs. at SPAWAR, we have a sort of a legacy where Admiral Rickover and Dr. Lyon worked on a lot of the undersea warfare stuff. They worked side by side, and I have a picture here of them standing on a submarine together.
Nice.
That's kind of the vision that I have for what could be. Now, you're not going to want a bunch of scientists just wandering around in an operation or something like that. But it seems that, especially in San Diego, where you've got SPAWAR, we're the only warfare center co-located with a major fleet concentration area. So we really are in a good position to help, and we aren't even helping as well as we could. So if we can figure out how to do it better here, we can spread that around the rest of the Navy and try to help achieve that vision that Winston Churchill saw, that we could make what science can do for the warfighter a reality. That's kind of like one of my personal career mission statements is make what science can do for the warfighter a reality. I think that encompasses that whole thought.
Sure. And there really is no excuse. I mean, I think there are some naval personnel at SPAWAR that are stationed there, but I'm not sure if it's a huge amount. But even I recognized my shore duty before here that I tended to forget some of the things, and I had some fun ideas, but they weren't always necessarily like legitimate to what the person on the ship right now needs. And so it does make you wonder what to do. I mean, it's what is maybe a 20-minute drive from here to SPAWAR. That's as easy as it gets in any fleet concentration area.
Right.
So truly, there's no excuse. And if you're listening right now and you're like, oh, but I've got a great idea to bridge that gap more closely. We could do this. Let us know. Write something on the whiteboard for us, and we'll take a look at it, because ultimately it needs to be kind of common, like a once a month or even more so. But the tough part there is everybody's got lives and we have families and our limited time. But nevertheless, it's would be huge to get together and talk more often and share that knowledge. So
yeah, when you talked about the explosion of technology, we don't necessarily even need to be in the same place anymore to communicate. And while I think that one important aspect is building trust, and sometimes as people, we really don't trust people that we've only met online. It would be interesting to see how many Facebook contacts we have that we've never met in person. I don't have any. I'm not going to friend somebody that I've never met. Sure. And I think it's similar in the Navy and with technologists and warfighters is, first of all, as a warfighter, if you're gonna spend your precious time to talk with a scientist, you need to expect that something's going to come of it. You're already busy enough. You have more to do than you can possibly do. Right. So why would you spend some of that precious time if nothing would ever come of it? Right. So you have to trust that the technologist actually can do something. And then, I think that comes with personal interactions. So there's something to be said for meeting in person. But then what about collaborative online tools? We talked about in the ideation session, what about like a match.com for technologists and warfighters? So you're not like dating or anything, but you're talking about ideas.
But you're using a dating engine. That's a great innovation, actually.
And what about Tiger cruises? You're allowed to bring sometimes people when you come to Hawaii. Why not say, hey, Josh, why don't you come meet me in Honolulu? Let's go back to San Diego, and you can watch how all these systems work and see some of the way that information flows, some of the things we run into that are big problems. That's an idea. Also, an intern started helping us put together an online collaborative tool over the summer. I think it's actually IdeaScale is a better commercial version of that. Okay. But what I was thinking is we need something like that where technologists and warfighters can co-evolve problems and solutions. And it needs to be on just unclassified networks, classified networks, and then top secret networks. And there should be some sort of connection so you can follow the thoughts through those. But things like that. So those are some of the thoughts. Also, we don't get any training on the Navy when we come into into SPAWAR. I don't know that there's anyone that does.
No, I was shocked by that when I first began talking to engineers. How they so little that you guys know.
Yeah.
It's almost like we need to pull you into a Navy style indoc and sit you down in the base theater and say, This is what a petty officer is. This is what a chief is. This is what an officer is.
Yeah, and that one quote I read. You're never going to hope to grasp the full everything that you learn by being out there on the sea. Mm-hmm. You're not going to, as a scientist, you can't hope to do that. But at least you can start to speak maybe a similar language and build that trust.
Well, and drop that barrier from those eggheads over there, or those I don't know what you guys call us, but those sailors over there, and instead of an us versus them thing, now suddenly it's I know so and so, he's not too bad, and then
yeah, and I'll tell you, working for the government right now, a lot of us could be going out and working in the industry and running into some issues, but we wouldn't have some of the same problems we're dealing with. But most of us, overwhelmingly, I think, are motivated by the cause that we're working for. And as we interact more closely with you as warfighters, that just becomes a stronger and stronger motivation, because we see firsthand what you're doing. We learn about your mission. We understand how you do your jobs and things that make it hard. And if we know I'm making this for Lieutenant Anderson or ET1 Anderson, I give you a promotion.
That's right. That's official, people.
I'm doing this for Jeff, mm-hmm. Then that is extremely motivating for a lot of us.
Sure. Well, and absolutely. And I've enjoyed being able to meet your engineers that come to the Disruptive Thinkers events. Mm-hmm. And I showed a couple of them the ship a few months ago. Got them on an LCS and gave them a little tour around, which was fun, because we all take for granted the knowledge that we have. And, your average sailor knows a lot of stuff and forgets that they know a lot of stuff. And I was explaining to them a maintenance card and just how you read a maintenance card. And they were just, oh, wow. And just that little bit, that creates that empathy. And I get a little bit more what he does. Mm-hmm. And so I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so you also considering design thinking, which is a huge thing that people are starting to understand and work in. My question is, how can we apply design thinking as engineers to warfighter problems? I think you need to have warfighters and technologists working together on design thinking projects.
Yes, and I'm going to plug the TANG right now. So if you're listening to this and you do not know what the TANG initiative is, check it out. It's by IDEO. IDEO is how you spell it, IDEO. And they are applying design thinking to the submarine fleet, and it's awesome. It's a very cool subject.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that Grassroots S&T is going to do next year is put together a user-centered design 101 for engineers. And that's kind of tying in this idea of coming up with ideas with learning warfighter needs and how those are interrelated.
Outstanding. Well, thank you very much. This has been an exciting podcast, and hopefully we'll do some more of these. I think the Scientist and a Warfighter podcast idea has some legs, and we'll see if we get some comments on it via the whiteboard. But thanks for coming out here today.
No problem. My pleasure.
All right. This is once again the CNO's Rapid Innovation Cell podcast with ET1 Anderson and my guest, Dr. Josh Kvavle. And we always have a hard time saying your name. And how do you say your name again?
Quiv-lee.
Quiv-lee. Dr. Josh. I can't even speak now. Dr. Josh Kvavle. All right. Thank you again.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks for listening today to the CRIC podcast. Remember, the views that we express today are those of our own. They do not necessarily represent Navy policy. Thanks for listening. Get involved with your local CRIC-X chapter. Check us out on Google. We're also on Facebook at www.facebook.com/NavyCRIC.